and I like flinch and panic.
Is that from the paparazzi?
Yeah, I think it's just like, it's just standard PTSD.
The singer also...
The entire world fell silent for a moment that nobody expected. It was July 7th, 2009. Inside a packed arena in Los Angeles, millions of people watched a memorial for one of the most famous men in history. Cameras captured singers, celebrities, and emotional speeches. But the moment that stayed with people forever came from someone who had never spoken publicly before. An 11-year-old girl stepped forward. Her voice trembled. Her eyes were red from crying. And when she spoke, the room changed. "Since I was born, Daddy has been the best father you could ever imagine." Those words came from Paris Jackson, the daughter of Michael Jackson. In that moment, she wasn't a celebrity child. She was simply a grieving daughter trying to say goodbye to the only parent she truly knew. The world watched her cry. But what the world didn't know was that this moment would become the beginning of a long, complicated journey, one filled with fame, trauma, rebellion, creativity, and survival. Because growing up as the daughter of the king of pop was never going to be simple. Behind the tears on that stage was a childhood most people would never understand. A childhood surrounded by security guards, masks, private tutors, and a father who tried desperately to protect his children from the spotlight that followed him everywhere. For Paris, that spotlight would eventually become impossible to escape. And as the years passed, she would reveal things that shocked the public about her pain, her identity, her struggles, and even the way she believes her father died. But to understand Paris Jackson today, you have to start much earlier, long before that heartbreaking speech, back to the strange, mysterious world where her story first began. Most children grow up learning how the world works. Paris Jackson grew up learning how to hide from it. Born on April 3, 1998 in Beverly Hills, Paris Michael Catherine Jackson entered a life that was already surrounded by curiosity and speculation. Her father, Michael Jackson, was not just a global superstar, he was one of the most recognizable people on the planet. And that created a problem. How do you give a normal childhood to children when the world recognizes their father everywhere he goes? Michael Jackson had an unusual answer: masks. When Paris and her brothers went out in public, their faces were often covered. To outsiders, the images looked bizarre. Critics mocked the decision. Photographers tried even harder to capture pictures. But years later, Paris explained something most people didn't understand at the time. The masks weren't about secrecy, they were about freedom. If people didn't recognize them, they could do things other kids did. They could go to arcades, they could walk through stores, they could experience moments that weren't immediately turned into headlines. Inside the gates of Neverland Ranch, their world felt even more surreal. There were amusement rides, animals, a movie theater, and endless space. To outsiders, it looked like a fantasy playground. But Paris later explained something surprising. It wasn't chaos. There were strict rules. They had school schedules, homework, responsibilities. Their father insisted that fun had to be earned. Good behavior meant rewards. Bad behavior meant consequences. Michael Jackson was trying to build something he never had himself, a childhood that felt safe. But even the most protected childhood can't stay untouched forever. And eventually, the outside world came crashing in. The gates of Neverland were supposed to keep the chaos out. Instead, they became the center of it. In the early 2000s, Michael Jackson's legal troubles exploded into public view. Media helicopters circled above the ranch. Cameras camped outside the property. News channels talked about the Jackson family non-stop. For Paris, this wasn't a news story. It was her home. Police searched the property. Headlines grew louder. Adults around her spoke in worried whispers. The peaceful world she knew began to feel different. Even though Michael Jackson was later acquitted, something had changed permanently. He never returned to live at Neverland again. Staff members left. The ranch slowly emptied. What once felt magical started to feel abandoned. For a child, the shift was confusing. Imagine watching the place that held your happiest memories slowly disappear. That's what happened to Paris. And then, only a few years later, something even more devastating happened. On June 25, 2009, the unthinkable occurred. Michael Jackson died. Reports flooded the news immediately. Emergency calls, ambulances, hospital updates. Eventually, the official ruling was announced. His death was classified as a homicide caused by medical negligence. For the public, it was shocking. For Paris, it was life-shattering. The person who had built her entire world was suddenly gone. At 11 years old, she was forced into the spotlight she had been protected from her entire life. And the grief she carried would follow her for years. But the hardest chapters of her story were still ahead. Grief doesn't disappear just because time passes. Sometimes it grows heavier. After Michael Jackson's death, Paris and her brothers moved under the care of their grandmother, Katherine Jackson. The change meant a new home, new routines, and a completely different environment. But the world was watching more closely than ever before. Every decision, every photo, every public appearance. For a teenager trying to figure out who she was, the pressure was enormous. Paris later admitted that these years were some of the darkest of her life. Losing her father had left a hole nothing seemed able to fill. At the same time, the media constantly analyzed her life, her appearance, and her choices. Online comments became brutal. Bullying followed her everywhere. She said there were days when she felt like she didn't belong anywhere, not in the normal world and not fully inside the celebrity world. That confusion eventually turned into something more serious: mental health struggles. Paris later revealed that during her teenage years she experienced severe depression and moments that forced her to step away from public life. She entered treatment programs designed to help young people facing emotional trauma and overwhelming pressure. For the first time in years, she had space away from cameras, space to heal. But healing isn't a straight path. And once she returned to the public eye, Paris Jackson decided she was done pretending everything was perfect. She would tell the truth about what she had been through, even if it shocked people. In 2017, Paris Jackson made a decision that surprised a lot of people. She stopped hiding. When she appeared on the cover of Rolling Stone magazine, the interview that followed was brutally honest. Instead of presenting a polished celebrity image, she talked openly about trauma, mental health, and painful experiences from her teenage years. She described moments when she felt completely lost, moments when the pressure of grief and public scrutiny became overwhelming. She also revealed something that shocked readers even more. She believed her father had been murdered. Paris didn't present it as a conspiracy theory. She presented it as something she genuinely believed in her heart. For many fans, the statement reopened long-running debates about the circumstances surrounding Michael Jackson's death. But that wasn't the only topic she addressed. She spoke openly about identity, sexuality, and relationships, subjects that had fueled rumors about her for years. Instead of denying them, she explained that her attraction had never been limited to one specific label. For Paris, connection was about people, not categories. The honesty was refreshing to some, controversial to others, but it did something important. It showed that she wasn't trying to live inside anyone else's expectations.
And as the world began seeing her differently, new opportunities started appearing. Opportunities that would push Paris Jackson into an entirely new chapter of her life, one that had nothing to do with being Michael Jackson's daughter. Suddenly, Paris Jackson wasn't just appearing in interviews. She was everywhere. Runways, magazine covers, fashion campaigns. In 2017, she signed with one of the most powerful modeling agencies in the industry, instantly placing her among rising stars in the fashion world. But Paris approached the opportunity differently than many expected. She wasn't trying to fit into a traditional celebrity image. Her tattoos remained visible, her style stayed unconventional, and she made it clear that she wasn't interested in becoming a perfectly polished brand. Instead, she treated modeling like another form of self-expression. And surprisingly, the industry embraced it. She appeared in campaigns for major fashion labels and began walking runways at international shows. Designers admired her unique presence, part rebellious rock musician, part artistic free spirit. Yet Paris never seemed fully comfortable being defined by fashion alone. She had another passion: music. For someone raised in a household where music was everything, it was almost inevitable. But when Paris started performing her own songs, people noticed something unexpected. Her sound was nothing like her father's. Instead of pop spectacle, she leaned toward indie folk and alternative music, quiet guitars, emotional lyrics, songs that felt personal and raw. It wasn't designed for stadium crowds. It sounded more like someone reading pages from a diary. And that honesty became the heart of her artistic identity. Music had always surrounded Paris Jackson, but creating her own music felt different. Instead of trying to compete with her father's legendary legacy, she moved in the opposite direction. Her style leaned toward indie folk, alternative rock, and emotionally raw storytelling. In 2020, she released her debut album. The project revealed a side of Paris that many people had never seen before. Her songs explored heartbreak, addiction, loneliness, and healing. There were no flashy pop hooks, just vulnerability. Listeners quickly noticed that the music didn't sound manufactured. The lyrics felt personal, almost uncomfortable in their honesty. Some tracks described emotional scars that clearly came from real experiences, and that authenticity resonated with fans. The album climbed the alternative music charts shortly after its release, proving that people were interested in more than just her famous last name. But behind the scenes, Paris was still fighting another battle, one she had kept hidden for years: addiction. Eventually, she would admit that drugs and alcohol had nearly destroyed her life. She described periods where she felt trapped in a cycle that seemed impossible to escape. The turning point came in 2020, when she made a life-changing decision. She chose sobriety, and the journey that followed would become one of the most important parts of her story. Recovery rarely looks the way people expect. Movies often show dramatic turning points followed by happy endings. Real life is much messier. When Paris Jackson decided to get sober, she didn't describe it as a heroic moment. Instead, she described it as the moment she stopped running from herself. Years of substance abuse had taken a toll on her body and mind. In later interviews and social media posts, she admitted that addiction had caused lasting damage, including a perforated septum that permanently affected her breathing. But the physical damage wasn't the hardest part. Facing emotions without substances was. Paris compared sobriety to surviving a car crash. Everything you tried to push into the back seat suddenly flies forward at once. Memories, regrets, trauma, all of it. Still, she kept moving forward. Over time, she began sharing her progress publicly, posting milestones and speaking honestly about the struggles of recovery. Instead of presenting a perfect success story, she described the process as ongoing. Some days were strong, others were incredibly difficult. But every sober year became a victory. And in 2025, she reached a milestone that meant more to her than any modeling contract or music release. 5 years sober. It was a moment she celebrated with gratitude, reflection, and a message to others who might be fighting similar battles. A message that said something simple but powerful. You are not alone. Even after years of progress, Paris Jackson has never claimed that life suddenly became easy. In fact, she often says the opposite. Sobriety removed the substances she once used to numb pain, but it also forced her to confront deeper struggles: depression, trauma, and anxiety that had been building for years. She has spoken openly about living with complex PTSD, obsessive-compulsive disorder, and treatment-resistant depression. Instead of hiding those diagnoses, she shares them publicly. Her reasoning is simple. If someone with her level of fame can admit they're struggling,
maybe it makes it easier for others to admit the same thing. Paris often reminds people that healing doesn't follow a perfect timeline. Some days feel hopeful, others feel exhausting, but she keeps moving forward. She continues writing music, appearing in creative projects, and speaking about mental health awareness whenever she can. And slowly, her public image has shifted. Instead of being seen only as the daughter of a global icon, people now recognize her as something else, a survivor. Someone who has experienced extreme loss, overwhelming fame, and personal battles, and still keeps creating, speaking, and living honestly. But the most interesting part of Paris Jackson's story may be what it reveals about resilience. Because despite everything she has faced, she continues choosing to move forward. And that choice might be the most powerful chapter of her journey. Paris Jackson's life has never followed a predictable path. From the outside, it might look like a story about celebrity and fame, but when you listen closely to her experiences, the deeper themes become clear. Loss, identity, healing, and the complicated process of growing up under circumstances no ordinary person could truly understand. She lost her father at 11 years old in front of a global audience. She spent her teenage years navigating grief while the media analyzed every step she took. She battled addiction, mental health struggles, and relentless public scrutiny. Yet she never stopped searching for something authentic. Whether it's through music, activism, or brutally honest conversations about recovery, Paris has continued telling her story in her own voice. And maybe that's why people remain fascinated by her journey. Not because it's glamorous, but because it's real. She doesn't pretend to have everything figured out. She doesn't claim that healing is easy. Instead, she speaks about life the way many people secretly experience it: complicated, messy, and constantly evolving. Today, Paris Jackson stands in a place very different from that tearful 11-year-old who once stood at a microphone saying goodbye to her father. She is older now, stronger in some ways, still struggling in others. But most importantly, she's still here, still creating, still speaking, and still proving that even after unimaginable loss, it's possible to keep writing new chapters.